Okay, good to see everybody. It's my honor and pleasure, or at least my responsibility, to introduce Professor Jason Baehr. It can be something of a tragedy, really, that so often it's only upon their deaths that we're given the opportunity to speak openly and unreservedly about the excellences of those we love and admire. Our tender reflections too frequently await a memorial service. So it looks like I've been given a unique opportunity here this evening, the chance to offer some thoughtful appreciation of the character and work of a dear friend and colleague. I've been given the gift of the moment and the occasion. But you know what? I'm good, actually. I think I'm going to wait on that. I don't want Jason to get too puffed up. We've got time, and he's young-ish, so I'm going to hold all that back for now, save it for his funeral, maybe keep a little mystery and intrigue for what I'll say upon his passing. So I'm going to reserve the maudlin hagiography for when Jason isn't in position to complain about my lack of epistemic integrity, as he would no doubt put it. So instead, for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some quick translation work. What I've got here are a few of the blurbs of prominent folks lauding his book. And I'm going to read them to you, and you'll hear what they say, but then I'm going to tell you what they actually mean. Okay, so you got the idea? This is what they say, but I'll tell you what they mean. So Susan Engel of Williams College says about Jason's book, quote, "By the time they've finished the book, readers will have a new sense of purpose about education and a clear idea of how to proceed." She meant no one is going to finish reading this book. Okay. Now, Marvin Berkowitz of the University of Missouri says this. He says, "Jason Baehr is an anomaly and a pioneer." He meant he's a weirdo. Okay. Berkowitz also went on to say, quote, "He's an accomplished philosopher who saw a practical problem and decided to leverage his scholarly knowledge of intellectual virtue to create a middle school designed to promote intellectual virtue development in students." What he meant was, he's kind of lost the thread. The Journal of School Choice says, quote, "Teachers of all varieties and situations will appreciate the call back to the true purposes of education, which they originally answered. What they meant was, not this again." And then finally, Scott Sider of Boston College said this, "In Deep in Thought, philosopher Jason Baehr impressively weaves together philosophy, social science, and his own on-the-ground work in schools to offer valuable guidance to educators for nurturing their students' intellectual virtues." Translation, pick a lane, bro. Okay, in some, though clearly not in all seriousness, I trust it's clear that my light send-up here is possible only because Jason is indeed so dear to me. Yes, his philosophical work is positively first-rate. Yes, he's won a number of prestigious grants, has co-founded an absolutely inspiring charter school, and has become one of the leading figures in the burgeoning field of virtue epistemology. Sure, he has a citation pattern that is the envy of many R1 scholars, and of course, yes, he's written the wonderful book he will discuss tonight that combines his penetrating philosophical precision with his dogged concern for the concrete cultivation of admirable epistemic character. But above all this, and of course much closer to his own heart, I'm sure, is the fact that he is my friend. I sincerely look forward to hearing from him now, and I think you should too, so let's welcome Jason Baehr.
Thank you, Dan. That was wonderful. I could listen to you roast me all night long.
Oh, well, I've got a few more.
Thank you to everybody for coming. This is a exhausting point in the semester for students and faculty alike, so I appreciate you taking the time and hope that you feel and get properly refreshed at the various stations here. And thanks also, Rhonda, for all the coordination and assistance. So this is a book, as the subtitle suggests, about teaching, kind of the purpose of teaching and some of the guiding principles and postures and practices that we might adopt as educators. If you came tonight hoping for kind of teaching tips, you're going to be disappointed. It's good to see that most of you, it looks like, are students and aren't even actually teachers. Because I'll let you read the book if you want to learn about those things. Instead, I'm going to do two other things. One, I just want to say a little bit about what intellectual virtues are. And then I would like also to tell you a story. The story that led to the creation of a school that in turn then led to the publication of this book. So those are the two things that I'll be doing, and I'll look forward to hearing I will probably raise as many questions for you as I provide answers, so I'm looking forward to the Q&A time later as well. Okay, so first of all, this, like I said, it's a book about teaching for intellectual virtues. Most of you, unless you've been in my classes, have probably not heard the term intellectual virtues before. It's a bit of a mouthful. So I want to try to kind of help you imagine and wrap your head around the kind of internal or psychological space that intellectual character and intellectual virtues map onto. So what exactly are intellectual virtues? Well, it can be useful to come at this question by considering another question. So I invite you to consider with me what it is to be smart. What is it to be smart? It's a very kind of basic question. All of us can have an answer to it. But though it might seem a kind of straightforward matter on the surface, I don't think it is. So think for a minute with me about what it is to be smart. Some of the things that might come to mind in response to that question would include knowledge. So you might think, if I were smart, I would know a lot about a lot. And certainly that's part of what it is to be smart. I might need some help to undo whatever it is I just did. Because this is actually, I don't want this, because that's the Google slide version. Okay. Well, I can continue. So one thing that seems related to being smart is knowledge, right? Thank you. I don't know how he did it, so I might do it again. But you might also think in terms of something like natural intellectual ability. So when you learn that someone is smart, or if you think of yourself or someone else as smart, you might think they have a kind of mental or cognitive gift. Something like what we try to measure with IQ constructs and similar ideas. So you might think that being smart is about having natural intellectual ability. You might think that it has to do with knowledge. You might think it also has something to do with skills. So to be smart would include, arguably, what we often refer to as critical thinking skills. It includes other skills as well, like maybe reading and writing and so on. But it seems like intelligence, or whatever it is to be smart, has some kind of skill dimension also. So what I want to propose to you is that, as kind of rich as this characterization or list is, I think it's incomplete. Specifically, I think that even taken together, these answers neglect a personal, volitional, choose your term here, or as I'll speak of, characterological dimension of intelligence or smarts. And to see that there is such an additional dimension, we need only reflect on the familiar fact that someone can know a lot about a lot, but also be quite intellectually arrogant, or dogmatic, or closed-minded. And those would be deficiencies as a thinker, or deficiencies as a learner. Similarly, someone can have a very high IQ or be naturally intellectually gifted, but have some of those same vices, like arrogance or closed-mindedness or intellectual dishonesty or something like that. And again, those are defects not just of us as persons, but also of us as thinkers or as cognitive agents or beings. Finally, a person can also have a lot of even critical thinking skills and yet not be an especially good thinker, because they might have the skills but not be motivated to use them. Or they might be motivated to use them but in a kind of reckless or careless way. So they might have certain skills but be intellectually reckless or careless or unmotivated. So what I hope I'm kind of drawing your attention and your imagination toward is what I'll refer to as intellectual character. And at the most general level, we can think of intellectual character as one's character as a thinker or as a learner. So normally when we think about character, we often think about who am I as a neighbor, or who am I as a citizen. And those aspects of character are what we might call moral character and civic character. But our character also expresses itself in how we think and learn, what we care about in a learning context, how we respond to evidence or counter-evidence or disagreement. Our character shows up and affects the quality of how we act and think and feel in those domains. Another slightly more technical way of thinking about intellectual character would be that it consists of a nexus of dispositions to act, think, and feel in particular ways within an epistemic context, or I should probably say within epistemic contexts, plural. For instance, in the context of thinking or learning, or maybe even teaching, or reporting, or other activities that involve the acquisition or transmission or refinement of knowledge. So that's very generally what I mean by intellectual character. Now I want to give you just a moment to think a little bit about what some of the general features of your own intellectual character might look like or amount to. So think about these questions with me. Do I enjoy learning? That's a question that gets at your attitudes or emotions or feelings in an epistemic or learning or knowledge-oriented context. Do I care? That's a state of valuing. Do I care about truth, accuracy, understanding? Am I disposed to wonder and ask questions? Do I have a habit of reflection? Do I seek alternative perspectives on important or controversial issues? How do I tend to respond, both affectively and behaviorally? How do I tend to respond to counter-evidence or intellectual disagreement? Does it make me uncomfortable? Do I avoid it at all costs? Do I have a keen sense of my intellectual limitations or cognitive fallibility? Or do I tend to ignore my own intellectual limitations or try to conceal those limitations from others? Am I able and willing to think differently than my peers? Do I speak up for what I believe in? How do I respond to experiences of intellectual struggle or failure? So my suggestion is that your answers to these questions say something important about you as a person. They say something about your character, but they say something about your character as it manifests in or relates to how you are oriented toward knowledge and evidence and truth and accuracy and understanding. So your answers say something about your character in an epistemic context. That is, your intellectual character. Intellectual virtues, then, we can think of as just strengths or excellences of intellectual character. We can also think of them as the character attributes of good thinkers and learners. So if I asked you to imagine someone that you think of as a really good thinker or a really good learner, and to consider what are the character attributes of that person, your answer would be probably a list of intellectual virtues, such as qualities like curiosity, open-mindedness, fair-mindedness, attentiveness, and also intellectual autonomy, humility, carefulness, thoroughness, courage, and tenacity. Those are the facets of a good or excellent or virtuous intellectual character. It's not an exhaustive list. There are many others. This is maybe an initial characterization of what intellectual virtue looks like or involves. So that's what I mean by intellectual virtues. And so the book is really about what classroom teachers can do, both in terms of beliefs and postures and practices, to help their students make meaningful progress, to practice, to learn about, to care about, and to make meaningful progress in some of these intellectual virtues or virtues of the mind. What I'm going to turn to now is the question of kind of why I decided to, how did it come about that I wrote a book about teaching for intellectual virtues? I'm a philosopher. I wrote about and thought about intellectual virtues at a very abstract and philosophical level for at least a decade before ever really thinking seriously at all about what it might look like to try to educate for intellectual virtues. And so to answer this question, I just want to sort of share with you the journey that led ultimately to writing the book. So like I said, I've worked since writing my dissertation back in the late 90s in an area called virtue epistemology. And this is a branch of a field in philosophy. It's an approach to the philosophical study of knowledge and knowing that foregrounds or emphasizes the importance of intellectual virtues. And I share this particular book cover with you because it is one of the pioneering works in my field. And it was written by Linda Zagzebski, who was at LMU for 20 years, up until about 1996 or so. So she really kind of put this field on the map with the publication of this book, which again she wrote while she was at LMU. And I came across this book just prior to my first week in graduate school, read the first chapter, and said, okay, I know what I want to work on, what I want to write my dissertation on, and now here I am, getting close to 25 years later, and I still haven't stopped thinking about the ideas central to this book. But like I said, I was working in virtue epistemology at a very abstract and technical and academic level for many years. Whoops, that's what I did last time. Then a friend of mine featured there, that's my friend Steve Porter, proposed to me one day the possibility of starting a school, a charter school. He had this vague idea of what a charter school was, and we were kind of surrounded by lots of friends that were in education in one capacity or another, though none of us had ever even thought about trying to start a school. But we kind of thought, hey, anybody can start a charter school, so why can't we? And that kind of crazy idea led to what was really about a 2-year series of conversations at a coffee shop between Steve and me, just kind of kicking around the idea of what would it look like to start a school, and what is a charter school, and how does one go about creating one. And as you might know, any charter school needs to have a kind of distinctive, value-added kind of emphasis. And as Steve and I got to talking about what the school might look like, we pretty quickly saw that this could be an opportunity to design a school around some of the core concepts and ideas in philosophy, or philosophical ideas in virtue epistemology. So the question we asked was, what would it look like to design a school from the ground up that was focused on academic teaching and learning, but that pursued and implemented those things in a way that was, again, systematically designed around helping students practice and make progress in these various intellectual virtues. And that kind of, hitting on that emphasis was enough to kind of keep me going and learning more about what this would, what we were getting ourselves into. And we realized after, probably was like a couple of years, that we were going to need money to make this happen. Money both to like buy me out of teaching for a year, to kind of think through what the school would look like, and to bring other people who have expertise that I don't together to think about curriculum and instruction and everything else that goes into just to starting an organization like this. And then we were also going to need money just to pay for building out the school, because the way charter schools work is you don't get money until the school is up and running and you have students. But it costs a lot of money to start a school. And so we had made a connection with some folks at the John Templeton Foundation and put in a bid for a grant it got broken into two grants, but it was basically a grant of a little over $1 million. And the president of the foundation at the time was Sir John Templeton's son, that's Dr. Jack Templeton. And this is a long story and I have to try to keep it concise, but we learned that our proposal was outstanding, our grant proposal. It got the highest possible score from all 4 referees or reviewers. It had the highest recommendation from the number 2 and the number 3 person at the foundation. But at this time, all of the final decisions on grants had to go through and were ultimately made by Dr. Jack Templeton. So we had a lot of optimism going into this meeting where they were going to make the decision about the grant. And this is, we put years of work into it at this point. And we knew we couldn't make it work without this grant. It wasn't going to happen. And so there was a lot of expectation and optimism. And then I got this email on November 14th, 2011. The upshot of which was, the news isn't good. And so it wasn't revise and resubmit, it was he decided not to fund it. And I'm really sorry, and but that was it. So I remember going to bed that night and really experiencing a great deal of relief, as much as anything, because at this point now we had a sense of what we were getting ourselves into, and it just seemed outrageous. And I didn't have any gray hair at the time. And so there was quite a bit of relief, but over the next several days, various people asked me more about the reasons and kind of gently suggested that it just became maybe the reasons that we were given for why the grant wasn't approved. I mean, of course I'm going to disagree with the reasons, but it wasn't just that. It was, I actually think that we addressed these concerns here, and that it would be very easy to kind of address these other concerns. So I ended up writing a long, very carefully worded, completely unsolicited email to our grant officer, just saying, I understand we're disappointed, but of course we understand the decision. And can I just point out a couple of things about what was actually in the proposal, but that we didn't foreground enough, and some other tweaks and adjustments that we could make to the project. So I sent that email to him, didn't hear anything back from him for a very long time. I don't remember all of the details, but our connection there said he would ultimately give the email back to Dr. Jack Templeton, and he did. And it must have been after a really delicious, satisfying lunch, because when he saw the sort of revised proposal, he said, okay, if they make these changes, I'll sign it.
Wow.
And so it was all back on again. And this was March 23rd. So for a few months, we had tremendous relief and disappointment. And then it was all back on again come March. And what that meant at that point was we had started writing the charter petition, which would have to get approved by our prospective authorizer, which would be Long Beach Unified. And that's its own massive, difficult project and undertaking. And so some other sorry, I can't talk about one of these people without some wonderful people came along. They were our dear friends. And just took up the massive parts of the burden. And I'm emotional because one of them is not with us. Dear friend Danielle. So anyway, Danielle came on as like project manager for the completing and writing completing the petition. And several of us wrote major chunks of it, but she kind of orchestrated the whole thing. She was the first employee of the school. Eric Churchill, a wonderful human, also a good friend, came on, and just at least 4 of us, and then the founding principal, Jackie Bryant, as well, just devoted so much blood, sweat, and tears for, again, some cases it was years, and in every case it was years, but none of us had done this before. None of us really knew what we were doing, but we're committed to the idea and saw it through, and against all the probabilities, the petition was approved by Long Beach Unified in 2012, which meant we could open in 2013. So that led to getting the charter approved. Then we had to figure out who was going to come to the school. So we had to start doing a lot of kind of marketing and communication and recruiting. And that's a picture from one of like the recruiting nights, and that's like one of the early Facebook page for the school. You're now getting, I didn't mention this, that we really put it on the nose of the school, what its focus and mission and philosophy would be, which would be intellectual virtue formation. And so we called the school the Intellectual Virtues Academy of Long Beach. Then in the fall of 2013, the school opened with just we started with a 6th grade, 50 students, and then added a 7th grade in year 2, an 8th grade the next year. Also added then a 3rd class to each of those 3 middle school levels. This is on opening day in 2013. That's the founding principal, Jackie Bryant, about to cut the ribbon. And since 2013, so that's 10 years ago, the school has just done really, really well. It's in a very sound financial position. Enrollment is very strong. More than anything, what I think is impressive about the school, bear in mind that it's a middle school, is that it's a happy place. It's by and large a happy place where the teachers and the office workers and the aides and the students feel comfortable being themselves and are guided by the unique educational kind of mission and vision of the school. It's attracted a lot of attention because of how systematically it is designed around its mission and vision. It's drawn a lot of attention from other educators and researchers. In 2017, I think, IVA high school was founded. My role in that was I couldn't do it a second time, but some wonderful people kind of from within the organization founded an IVA high school, which continues in Long Beach. There are different campuses, but is in Long Beach as well. That's from the high school website. So it's really, I mean, it's a real school. It's a public school. It has its ups and downs. Things are often hard. COVID was hard. But by and large, it's been a really tremendous success and far exceeded anything that we ever imagined. So here's a quick 3-minute video, and then I think I'm done.
This is a school where kids are excited about learning and kids are excited about thinking.
Just being at the school is changing my thinking a lot.
We're asking our students to care about how their mind works.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, when they think of the school, they imagine that in every way it's different from every other school, but in a lot of ways
it's absolutely normal middle school, but with like this college level value for learning.
But here they actually try to engage us, and if somebody's more curious about something, they're most likely gonna wanna engage into it more and pay attention more.
What it takes to be a good student isn't something that you either are born with or aren't born with. Intellectual virtues are just the personal qualities or the character traits that one needs in order to be a good thinker or a good learner.
When you're always thinking about the virtues, when everything is based around the virtues, then you're growing. It's not just about learning facts, but it's about building your personality.
So students meet in groups of 8 for 1 hour per week with an adult advisor, and the advisory program provides an opportunity for them to think and learn and explore with low stakes. There are no grades. And also to do it with another adult figure who is interested in them, cares about getting to know how their mind works.
Because kids who are able to articulate those kind of things, get feedback on those things, they end up developing better psychologically, and they end up doing better in high school and throughout their life.
Here, making mistakes is an opportunity for me to try something new, for me to go back again with a different mindset. If I don't get it, it's another opportunity to be able to learn about it.
that is what is going to take you far in life. That is why you are going to succeed over others. You may have challenges and this may not come easily to you, but I've noticed that you never ever give up.
What did I do wrong? How could I change this for next time? How could I change my thinking so I can be able to get the problem right the next time?
That's one of the things that our students love about the environment. They feel supported in the context of struggle, and they feel encouraged to take risks.
Who would I be if I went to IVA as a middle school student? I would be a lot more confident in knowing how to address problems I've never considered before.
These virtues, if students take these out into the world, they are much more open to everything the world has to offer them.
I'm actually excited to go to school, learn something new.
I've made a personal connection with each of the teachers, and I feel like I can ask them anything.
No one's really left out. Everyone's together. Everyone knows each other. You can talk to the teachers whenever you want.
We also want them to leave our school with this kind of sense of wonder and this desire to continue learning. We want to equip students to learn and live well.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I always get goosebumps when I think about this. First of all, I would like to just remind you that we do have Dr. Baehr's book in our library. And I was very frustrated because somebody had chucked it out and I couldn't get my hands on it. And so I'm so happy to now be able to hold it up and show you all. So please take the opportunity to check it out. We are going to sit and chat a little, and then you guys can ask questions if you have any. Let me just turn off this one. I just have one really quick practical question. So, did you buy a new building, or did you go into a building, or, I mean?
Yeah, we rent space. There's a church in Long Beach that had previously had a school at it that had closed, and so it was zoned and outfitted with sufficient classroom space, and that's what we've been.
Okay, I was just
It's worked out
curious.
well. Yeah, no, that's right.
'Cause that's
Well, that's the big challenge. That's
Yeah,
one of the many
yeah.
challenges, yes.
I mean, not to mention hiring all the staff, and wow, it blows me away all you did, I'm sorry. Okay, so you talk about teaching intellectual virtues as an idea which is practical, realistic, and relevant. Can you talk more about that?
Yes, so you've gotten the sense already that this is like a very idealistic endeavor. It was. In some ways, it is a very idealistic school, but we try to take its idealism like in sort of psychologically realistic terms. Okay, so it's easy to just get carried away and overambitious, right? If we're thinking that, oh, we have the potential here to radically change the intellectual character of all of our students in a 3-year period, if that's what we're thinking, then we're gonna be disappointed, and the students are gonna be disappointed. So our concern from the beginning has been what to just always be asking questions like, what realistically can we do here? And how can we understand the psychology and the identity of our students in a way that really fits with what we're trying to do. So trying to be very realistic about what we're doing, trying to be very, very practical about it, and to intelligently aspire to a very lofty ideal.
Not only your students, but also your teachers.
Teachers, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the word modeling comes up quite a bit in the book, and you even have a whole chapter on it. Can you talk more about modeling and why it's so important?
Yes, so I mean, it's just kind of common sense. There is research that supports this as well, but it's kind of common sense that if the teacher in a classroom wants to get their students to practice and care about and make progress in these virtues, but the teacher is failing to model or practice the virtues themselves, then that's going to really hinder what their efforts. And so we certainly think it's critical for teachers to be practicing and learning about the virtues as well, and then to be authentically modeling them for their students. And I think that modeling virtues has kind of a twofold significance or effect. One is that it provides students with a very concrete picture of what it looks like to practice these virtues. So I could explain to a student what open-mindedness or curiosity looks like or what it is, but it's another thing for them to actually see me wonder in the classroom or see me give a fair hearing to a viewpoint that I don't agree with. So there's an instructive, practical dimension to modeling, but then there's also a motivational or inspiring dimension to it as well, in as much as these are attractive qualities. And so when you see a professor model something like curiosity or intellectual humility, that can be really powerful and moving. And I just want to share a quote on this note from the book that is from an email from Father Bob Lawton, who some of you may know and certainly remember, a former president of LMU. And Bob and I were talking once about intellectual humility, and he shared a story with me about showing up to Harvard as a grad student, and in one of the first seminars he took, a fellow student of his asked the professor a question, and the professor's response was, "I don't know. I don't know the answer to your question. I'm going to have to figure it out, and I'll get back to you." And here's what Bob said about that experience and the effect that the modeling of intellectual humility in this case had on him. He said, "It was the first time I could remember a teacher saying, 'I don't know.' And this man was one of the leading scholars in the world. From then on, I began to feel that it was all right not to know. I no longer had to pretend to know. From then on, I began to think things through. It's interesting to me here how someone modeling one virtue, intellectual humility, inspired him to practice that virtue himself, but then how the practice of that virtue led to the practice of some other virtues as well. So he started he began to think things through. I wanted to know not what someone else thought, but what I thought. So there's a kind of thoroughness and intellectual autonomy in his thinking. I realized it was okay to be wrong for a time while searching for the truth. Of course, this was just the beginning of the journey, but it had begun. The fact that I still vividly remember these moments some 50 years later shows how powerful these moments were. So it's just a beautiful illustration of how one person modeling one virtue in one moment can have a totally reorienting effect on the intellectual life of a student.
Thank you. It's nice to remember Father Lott and Linda Zexetsky.
Yes, exactly.
I'm one of
That's right.
probably the only person in this room who actually
Yes,
remembers
yes,
and
that's
was friends
wonderful.
with her. So.
Yeah.
This is a question that I didn't give you a heads up on, but
Okay.
I'm going to.
Yeah.
What's the hardest intellectual virtue to practice?
I think that's a very person-specific question. So I think for each of us, the answer to that question is likely to differ. For me, the virtue that I've thought about the most and written about the most, because I feel like I'm most challenged by it, is intellectual humility. I think that those of us in academia are susceptible to various forms of intellectual pride, which I understand very broadly, even to include things like a kind of perfectionism and the desire for certainty. Those can be damaging aspirations. And I think of intellectual humility as a kind of appropriate relationship, having an appropriate relationship to our intellectual limitations.
It seems in this day and age that open-mindedness seems to be very hard for a lot of people.
Yes, and intellectual humility as well, right? It's difficult to acknowledge the limitations of our perspective and evidence.
Yeah. So your book seems to point to the Jesuit mission of teaching the whole person. I'm sure we can all get that one. Is that the ultimate goal of teaching for intellectual virtues?
Educating the whole person. Well, I do think there's a lot of overlap in some of the concepts, and as with something like critical thinking, I feel like this kind of rich, fine-grained language of specific virtues is a really nice way of unpacking not just what it is to be a critical thinker, but also at least part of what it might look like to educate for the whole person. Mm-hmm. So I do tend to think of educating for the whole person as at least partly a matter of educating for intellectual virtues. And I think another kind of point of resonance there is that on the Jesuit Ignatian picture, education is about personal formation. And similarly, I think of intellectual teaching for intellectual virtues or intellectual virtue formation as a kind of deeply personal orientation. Personal, but geared towards certain epistemic activities and aims. So I do think there's a lot of interesting overlap. And how has the Jesuit belief in teaching the whole person influenced you? I don't know. That's a good question. Because I can't say that I've consciously. I was interested in virtue epistemology before I came to LMU, and so it's hard for me to know like how has being here. I think it's definitely provided support. So for instance, whether that's through some of the grants that I've gotten or through the Taylor Chair in the philosophy department allowed me to pursue a project on virtue epistemology and Ignatian pedagogy and spirituality. So I feel like it's been a supportive environment for the work that I've been doing. And it's probably affected and influenced me in deeper ways that I'm aware of. The internet. Yeah. Yes. How does one use the internet
in an intellectually virtuous way? Is it a friend or foe to young thinkers?
I mean, this is one of those areas where it can be tempting to overstate the importance and the need for intellectual virtues in this respect. I don't think that practicing these virtues is a sufficient solution for knowing how to, or successfully navigating the digital landscape, right? There are other kind of structural things that big tech bears responsibility for, and other sorts of solutions that are critical. That said, we make decisions about how we look for and respond to evidence and information, and those decisions can become habits, and they manifest and reflect our intellectual character. And so I think that having an appropriate combination of carefulness and skepticism balanced by openness and intellectual humility, I do think that, I maybe put it this way, to the extent that navigating the digital landscape today places volitional demands on us as thinkers, so far as it requires us making particular choices, where we put our attention, where we put our trust, how we evaluate things, how we respond to information or counter evidence. Insofar as that enterprise makes volitional demands, I think that the intellectual virtues are a really useful way of understanding what it would look like to satisfy those demands and to navigate that landscape in a responsible and effective way. So I think it's part of the solution.
Okay, I was going to ask a question and then it just slipped. Oh, okay. So this is a question that I've been thinking about in terms of young teachers who are coming into the field with all these ideals, and is another IVA, I mean, I'm so glad that you're starting one with high school. Are you going to start K through 12, move into more of the K through 6? Is that viable? You have all these teachers that are looking for...
Yeah. I don't have it in me to start any more schools. That's why I could only
too
do one.
bad.
No, but people have come to us at various points and talked about scaling up, and we had this was years ago, probably after the school was only open for 3 or 4 or 5 years. The foundation, not the Templeton Foundation, came to us and was interested in having conversations about scaling up. We were just so exhausted and still so busy with every, this is really hard to even just keep. I'm not involved in the day-to-day operations of the school, but the people that are very, very busy.
Yeah.
And I'm not that entrepreneurial, and I don't want to devote myself to starting schools. So we didn't really bite at that opportunity, but we also have concerns about replicating this, not that it can't be done, but it just has to be done very carefully and well, because it's such a profoundly personal and interpersonal undertaking. Who's involved, and the quality of the relationships that are involved, and the culture that's built at the school. All of those things are so critical, and that's fragile, and those things are not easy to just. You can't just put them in a binder. So I do think that it can be replicated. I just think it needs to be done by the right people with the right resources and the right kind of focus. But I don't think I wouldn't expect it to be easy.
Is it harder to work with middle school though to practice, to teach and to practice these things when by then they're already pretty much molded?
Yeah, that's so interesting. People ask kind of the opposite, like
leave it to me.
Well, no, but people ask that question too, and my thinking tends to go in that direction. So I do think that ideally this would be a K through 12 enterprise, and that you'd start at that young age. That's not the way we did it. For various reasons, but we also saw middle school as a good opportunity, because this is a time when students are developing some higher order thinking abilities that give them opportunities to practice some of these virtues in some pretty rich ways. And also it's a time where their identity is in formation, and
Right.
it's an opportunity to help insert some of these values into how they think about themselves and define themselves. But again, I agree that it would be better for this if this were at K-12.
Cool. I would like to open it up to our audience now. Do you have any questions for Dr. Baehr? Yeah, it's Dr. Stark.
Yes, of course, always fascinated in the spirit of Jane Addams and John Dewey and the American tradition when philosophers run schools. And it's a lost American art almost. I was curious, and my setup is going to be very philosophical, but the questions about the practical dimension of school. For those of us who are, and forgive me, everyone else, for those of us who are inclusive end Aristotelians, that says, okay, you have intellectual virtues, but there's no way you can have those by themselves. There has to be moral virtue. And given the spirit of Dewey and Addams, I would add civic virtue as the highest virtue to learn in school. And that's what the American school can actually teach us, is civic virtue. Is it, dare I say, okay at your school that these intellectual virtues lead students to moral virtues and, dare I say, civic virtues? Now, that's the foreground of this question. How do you navigate the moral space that's born out of discussions of virtue?
Yeah. That hasn't been difficult. In fact, it's almost like I feel like one thing we've learned that we didn't know in advance, it makes sense in hindsight, but one thing we've learned is that in order to get students to engage in the type of learning that we're inviting them into, there has a certain ethical, moral, psychological, interpersonal and preconditions have to be met. This needs to be a place where they feel cared for and respected and trusted. So we feel like on both ends, certain moral conditions have to be in place in order for the kind of learning to take place that we're hoping for. And then, the hope is that by teaching them how to think well, that will have a positive effect on their ability to make morally responsible decisions and to help shape who they are as citizens. So I feel like there are kind of moral and civic bookends to what we're doing, and have not run into any, I mean, if anything, it's like parents of middle schoolers like the ethical and civic kind of emphasis. It tends to be more like scholars and other people outside of those contexts that worry about them more. Though I didn't know that going into it and wondered myself. Well, just the term virtue, right? The term virtue has certain associations, political and moral associations. And I was worried that by foregrounding virtue in the name of the school and everything we're doing so prominently, that might be alienating. We just haven't had experienced that at all.
Yes, way in the back.
Thank you for the presentation. It was really good. I was wondering, cool, it's all the way up there. It's working. All right. I was wondering about, as I think somebody in the video had said, like, man, if I had this middle school experience, I wonder how I would have turned out. I found myself wondering the same thing, and then also in, I think it was also in the video there, I heard there were no grades that were taken. I might have misheard that.
Yeah, it's understandable that you thought that. What I was talking about in the video at that point was there's an advisory program where students meet together once a week with an advisor and get to explore ideas and practice these virtues. And that there are no grades in the advisory program. there are definitely grades at the school.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a point of clarity because I was confused a little bit,
understand.
like how the measurement of success would be, or how success would be measured. And then on the same practical vein, was wondering how. So the grades being the measurement of success within the school, but then between schools, between these virtue schools and other high schools or other middle schools, and how the students of the virtue school compare to the students of the other schools.
Great question. And in terms of like academic performance, I can't. I mean, testing's been weird through COVID. I don't even know if they've got data post-COVID but because it's a charter schools are public schools, they have to take the standardized tests, and at least going into COVID, the test scores from IB8 students were among the best in the district, and even when you control for demographic and socioeconomic considerations, the school was doing as good or better than average, or than the comparator schools. And that's remarkable, because it won't surprise you that there's absolutely not a focus on teaching to the test at the school. The hope has been, and so far this seems to have been borne out, the hope has been that if we just can focus on deep learning and thinking, that they'll do well enough on the standardized assessments.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Ray, right up here.
And then back here.
Okay, sorry.
I'm just, I'm saying he
My
should
wife is telling
have
me to say it.
He
She
needs to
wants
add,
answer
yeah,
questions.
they don't just get grades, they also get feedback about the virtues.
Oh yeah,
Which I think is interesting.
Oh, that is interesting.
Thank you.
So, thank you. Yeah. I mean, you think about like a standard report card. You get grades, and then there's maybe a tiny little space for comments. In the elementary, maybe even in middle school, doesn't tend to be those things. Students get quite a bit of qualitative feedback on their intellectual character strengths and limitations. And it's beautiful. I mean, they really are known as thinkers. And my older two kids, and then our oldest two have gone through the school, and then our youngest is there now. And just as a parent, it's wonderful to see how well my child's teachers know the mind of my student and can call out their good qualities and encourage them in the practice of some of these other virtues. So that kind of assessment is part of the program as well. Frankly, the having to assign grades, I mean, we have to do it, so we've never seriously thought about not doing it. But that does complicate things, because it is a kind of extrinsic motivator, which tends to be inversely related to intrinsic motivation, which is a really important part of what we're trying to nurture.
Ray?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak on the more social dimensions of the intellectual virtues, in particular kind of non-ideal situations which promote kind of active ignorance, so an ignorance about your own ignorance. So then you get this kind of feedback loop of a vicious environment and vicious character. Yeah.
Well, sorry, what's the question? I mean, I'm tracking. I agree that phenomenon happens, but
not fully fleshed out, but
yeah.
Kind of breaking that feedback loop of
Yeah.
a vicious environment and then a vitiated character.
Yeah, I mean the way that epistemic vice can compound is a problem, and frankly, I think that's why if these sorts of educational efforts have to be multi-pronged, multi-dimensional, complex. There's not a single intervention that a teacher can use and presto, their student is no longer intellectually arrogant or dishonest or whatever. It's really a combination of environmental, cultural considerations, curriculum matters, instructional practices matter, the posture and mindset of the teachers matter. The development programming matters. So I think it's probably through just trying to align all these different variables that we can have control over with this goal of yeah. I mean, sometimes I think even if we can just reliably help students be less intellectually vicious, right? Or be less arrogant, or less lazy, or less like that would be an accomplishment. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
In the back.
Hi, I'm a fundraiser by trade here at LU.
Oh, great.
We'll take money.
So I'm very curious about the Templeton Foundation and
Yeah.
how you kept in touch with them over the years and how that relationship has evolved and
Yeah, it's a very good. I have a very good relationship with the foundation. So we got that initial $1 million grant, and then we have to start the high school. We got a $2 million grant, and then to continue with some other, both to continue building out the high school and with some other initiatives we were doing that really involved kind of disseminating some of what we're learning and doing, and giving other educators from across the world really opportunities to come in and see what's happening at the school. We got it, I think the third grant was $2.1 million. So we've had several big grants from them. I don't think our relationship is still great. We'd have to come up with a new project to get more money from them. But I do a lot of work with Templeton, involved in several different interdisciplinary research projects. So they fund a lot related to character. They're one of the few foundations that will give money to philosophers. That's why we went where we did. But they think very, 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 very favorably of this project and of this school, and I know they're very proud of how it has turned out.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, hi.
Totally inspired by your story, your presence, your obvious commitment to this. I really appreciate that. So that's the main thing I want to say. You've got me thinking, and I want to reflect back a little bit of that, and it has to do with your project, but maybe also larger questions about what we're doing here at LMU. And maybe the best way to frame it is in terms of affect and awareness. So as I listened to you describing the cultivation of intellectual virtues, I found myself wondering, where does affect come in, or what the ancient philosophers would have called eros, or what we would call feeling, the kind of thinking that can be provoked by deep feeling. Feelings can be messy as well, but thinking that's rooted in affect can be powerful. So that's one part of it. Awareness is the other part of my question, is thinking that issues into a kind of an awareness of self, perhaps God, others, the world. Not exactly a virtue, but closer to something that the mystics would say we're drawn into most deeply, the kind of clearing away of so much debris that keeps us from being aware of who we are to one another, and who we are in relation to the world. So affect and awareness, I'm just terribly interested to know whether those enter into what you're doing in your school, or if they enter into your own teaching here or your thinking, because they're very important to me. And I notice that students also respond to this, or at least the students that I encounter. Yeah.
The easiest way for me to speak to those two concepts, I think, is to link them to kind of how I think about the structure of an intellectual virtue, and then I could talk about the implications pedagogically, I guess. But I think of intellectual virtues as having 4 different dimensions. So part of what it is for me to be open-minded is to have a certain ability or competence or skill. I need to be able to think outside the box or be able to inhabit or take up alternative points of view. But I can have that competence and not be motivated to use it. So there's also a motivational dimension to intellectual virtues. But if I'm motivated to be open-minded and don't have good judgment about when and when not to, or how much, or toward which sources to perspective switch or think outside the box or practice open-mindedness, then I won't really have the virtue either. So there's a kind of competence dimension and a motivational dimension and a judgment dimension, and then finally there is an affective dimension. So I think part of what it is to possess these virtues in their fullness, at least, is I think in their fullness, they involve a love of learning, a love of knowledge, a love of intellectual exploration. So I think that again, in their fullness, they have a robust affective dimension. And so that gives those of us who are interested in trying to educate for these things the challenge, because I can teach students we can teach skills. You can teach skills largely through practice and feedback and scaffolding and so on. But it's a very different thing to know how do we inspire a love of learning, how do we inspire a care or concern for intellectual exploration. And I think that, to my mind, that's where modeling becomes really important, for us to show more so than to tell students about these sort of epistemic affections or passions. And then as far as awareness, at least as you've described it, I'm thinking of that as sort of among the kinds of knowledge or epistemic goods that these virtues are geared toward, that they help facilitate. So it can take profound intellectual humility and curiosity and intellectual honesty for me to really know myself. It can require profound attentiveness and open-mindedness and curiosity for me to really understand another person or the natural world or any given subject matter. So I think that kind of rich awareness, something maybe moving in the direction of wisdom, I think of as sort of an intentional aim or object of some of these virtues.